Welcome back to Honest Faith Conversations. This is part 2 of 2, talking about The Handmaid's Tale. And so far we've talked a little bit about our fantastic, question and response from one of the writers. And we've talked about feminism and an imbalance in equality.
Yep.
We've talked a little bit about the show and about where it stems from, kind of the
background of the inspiration that...
Yeah, the parallels that are there. So we're moving on now to religion.
Which is a big chunk of the story. Surprise, surprise.
Yeah, if you have not seen the show, again... spoilers are in order for this part of the episode. So
if they
go watch the show. Don't binge watch it like we said at the beginning of our 2-part episode here. Take your time. But if you haven't watched the show and you just happen to start on episode 2 of our show, I don't know why you would.
Yeah, why would you? You can stop right now. It's fine. Just go back.
We'll be here.
To part 1. You know where to find part 1. And then just come back.
Exactly. So, religion. Well, I just started talking about Jesus and some of the things that Jesus said about equality is helping people to see you as a human being. There were some things that were thrown in, and these are things. Surprisingly, there's a group of people who are trying to figure out what Jesus actually historically said, and not what people just interpret Jesus as saying. That the gospel writers were not out to write historical biographies like we know historical biographies to be now. They wrote pieces to be true about the nature of the person they were writing about, which it could be all kinds of number of things. You can embellish almost anything.
Yeah.
And so there's this group of people who are actually trying to figure out what Jesus actually said. They're still trying to find proof of this historical writings that people think that Jesus actually said, that they were written down in a book, and they call that book Q. So they're looking for Q. But there was a great April Fool's joke that was put out like a year or 2 ago that they actually found Q, and it was fantastic. I shared that somewhere before, but go check that out. It's pretty funny.
Anyway.
But all that to say is that these are, things that are debated about Jesus and about some of the things that he said, because there are things that Jesus never talked about that are commonly applied to religion because people believe this is what God wants. These are writings from, like St. Paul, especially about women. And I think this has a lot to do with the show because of the bad history of religion and politics, especially when you get politics involved in your religion and religion involved in your politics.
Yeah, it just gets muddy and bad, and people get mistreated. It's
not like those old commercials for Reese's peanut butter cups where you get peanut butter in your chocolate and chocolate in your peanut butter, and it's a great flavor combination. No. These two do not belong together. There was a reason why our forefathers wanted a separation of church and state. And especially because of these things is that we as religious people, we disagree. And because we disagree is that one of the weird things about the way that our governments in our churches work in our religions is that the loudest voices end up getting their way. Yeah. Or it is the people who give the most money to the church that end up getting their way, their interpretation of the doctrine and what the doctrine has to say for society.
And that can really, really alienate a lot of people. And it's honestly one of the reasons why a lot of millennials are not going to church anymore.
Exactly. And this had to do with women for so long because women were not allowed. Well, for one, they weren't even allowed in the same room as the men in Christian churches.
Or they were separated. They had to be women were on one side, men were on the other. Men could add to the conversation in church. Women had to be silent the whole entire time.
Yep. All of this because of a letter that Paul wrote to his disciple Timothy. I mean, seriously. I mean, this is a letter to Timothy. He's trying to tell Timothy about some things for his own personal experience. And I think there's a lot of what Lynn said, even in her response, too, is that it wasn't supposed to be for his own interpretation, for his own experience of life. And we have taken this letter and turned it into gospel thanks to Ignatius, but, that's a different story for a different day. That, we've given it, a whole breadth of things that have nothing to do with where we are.
And he, just to clarify, like, he wrote this for just one person. It'd be like if I wrote a letter to Miguel and I was like, this is how, like, I like to live my life. And then somebody was like, oh, Kathy, like, knew some, like, great higher-up person. So this must mean what the great higher-up person wants for everybody to do.
Exactly.
Which is not the case.
Yeah, and I think that Paul had his own issues to deal with. Timothy had his own issues to deal with. And I don't know them. I don't know what they meant, what the writings meant. And, I love reading them because I think that they portray an image of God that is different than my own. That the divine is evident in the readings, but I don't like to say that the Bible is inerrant in any way. That it's full of errors.
Oh yeah, I mean, it contradicts itself like how many times? I mean, that alone should be enough proof for you.
And this is all part of the controversial trigger warning.
Oh yeah. By the way, sorry, we might be offending people.
Yes.
But the Bible contradicts itself all over the place on many different issues. So that alone should be enough proof for you that you can't, like, take it, like, word for word and have it, like...
literal.
Yeah, you can't take it literally because, I mean, what would you do if, like, the Bible says I can eat chocolate, but then also another part of the Bible says I can't eat chocolate, so then...
Well, it
what do I do?
doesn't say anything about chocolate because they didn't discover it yet.
Well...
That was my people.
I just brought it as an example, like, for the
Okay.
modern day audience, for people who have not read the Bible.
Yeah. But especially with the difference of rules between Leviticus and Deuteronomy, the Leviticus passages are for Levites. They were for the priestly class. They were not for the regular everyday people that was in Deuteronomy. And that's what, all of this cherry picking, has to deal with. And it has a lot in the show. The show shows a lot. And I haven't read the book because, it is required reading in some schools, but for me it wasn't. Of course, I went to a Christian college, so I doubt that they would even use this book. It's probably offensive to a lot of people.
Well, I did
Society,
too, but I didn't read a lot of, like, Christian books.
Yeah. I went for youth ministry, though, so I had...
True.
Yeah,
well,
almost all of my college reading was based around ministry stuff.
Yeah,
so.
And for me, my college reading was mostly based on... Well, because I grew up in Montana, and for those of you who don't know, like, one of the things I love about Montana is that they require in our education system to have some kind of, like, Native American learning or Native American history incorporated into our larger education as a whole. Mm-hmm. So almost every single book that I read in college was either about Native American culture, or it was written by a Native American author, or it's about the Wild West. Like, that's just what I know. So I can tell you about those kind of books. But anyway, like, as a point, like, we didn't read the books and we weren't required, but I am looking forward to it. A friend had suggested that she'd let me borrow it once her other friend is done reading it, so.
And I think it's wonderful that it's been used in a lot of women's marches throughout the last, how long has it been since it was put out? 30 years, 32 years since it was published.
85, yeah.
And so, I mean, I'm trying not to cherry pick, especially from this work, from this piece.
Especially since in the piece they cherry pick the Bible.
Exactly. But that's why I bring it up, is because cherry picking doesn't do anybody any good, because it removes it from the context of what's going on. I mean, especially one of my least favorite parables in the Bible was the parable of the talents. And the reason why is because I ended up hearing it every year, because I went to mainline denomination churches for the vast majority of my adult life. And everybody uses that at stewardship time to kind of say, hey, this is how you increase the church, is by giving of your talents. And by giving your talents, you're helping to multiply them and invest them. And no. This is in a group of parables that Jesus taught that were very apocalyptic in their nature. And they're talking about, because right after this, you have the parable of the sheep and the goats. And you have Jesus kind of saying, okay, this is what it is like to invest. It's to give to the least of these. It's to go out and to feed the hungry, to clothe the naked, to visit the people in prison, to give drink to the thirsty, to give and to be kind, and to, as I like to put it in my blog, is to put God back together again. Is because we all have pieces of the divine within us, and putting those together and making a bigger community is what it's about. And I think that this especially it shows the danger of when religion breaks those pieces apart even further.
Oh yeah, for example, like the Beatitudes. Like, I don't know if many of our readers are like very familiar with it, but it's read a lot, especially during Ash Wednesday for most of the mainline denominations. But in Handmaid's Tale, they say over and over again to the handmaidens, "Blessed are the meek," and that's it. That's it. Just blessed are the meek. Like, they don't finish it. And in the series, Offred does. She finishes it, and then she gets punished for it. Yeah, because she's like, I remember.
Well, when she also made mention that it was her father's church that was being torn down. And I'm guessing that her father was either a priest or a minister, and that's something that I don't think was very clear.
Or he could have just been a member of the church, because a lot of people are like, oh, that's my church. Well,
that too. But so she has this background with religion as well. And, this is, and I think that, this is especially showing when we have these completely differing ideas of doctrine, and how that our cherry picking can get us into trouble on both sides. I mean, this is what happens when you get too extreme on one side or too extreme on the other, is that you end up having this infighting that ends up destroying things.
Well, and things never get done when there's so much infighting. Like, no good gets done.
Oh, I know. And this is something that I'm going to bring up later in our Where Should We Go From Here segment. But I think that, there is so much time and energy and money being spent on making sure that this infighting stops, to prevent these infighting things, that it should be spent on doing those things that Jesus taught us to do, which is to love people, is to show kindness to the least of these. And I think that ultimately that's what Western religion has forgotten about. And I know I made mention of it last week, of William Barber's talk on the New Yorker radio hour, which, by the way, you really need to go check that out. 20 minutes well spent. But where he's saying that if it's not going to the least of these, if it's not giving to them, if it's not making the outcast feel welcome, if it's not doing these things, that it is heresy in a sense. And I agree with that, because yes, that is part and parcel with my own interpretation of Gospels and Scriptures. And that's what I'm trying to say, is that I might be wrong. I don't know. But I feel like I'm right, because, this is how I read the Bible. This is how I read Jesus. This is how I read these things. And this is, what I'm saying is that we ultimately need each other to bring those pieces of God together, so that we can figure out what is true. Because the truth is found somewhere in the middle. And there's this great thought in Eastern societies, that in Eastern thought, that if there is a disagreement between people, that more often than not, the truth can be found in the middle.
Which is why compromising is so important. And learning how to compromise is a good thing. Like, for some reason, there's this big idea right now that compromising makes you look weak.
Yeah.
But it's not. Compromising is actually a good thing because it gives you, once you know how to compromise correctly and efficiently, it gives you the strength to realize what is the most important piece of the thing you're trying to do. Because that's the thing that you may not want to compromise, but maybe other parts of the plan, like, you can toss out, like, they're not as important. And it's good to recognize what is supposed to be the objective versus how you get there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. And really, I think that we have lost sight of this in not just Christianity, but in most religions. I think that because there may be something that we've always done this way, that tradition tends to trump experience. And that's why I fell in love with the Episcopal Church. I fell in love with the Episcopal Church because the Episcopal Church tries very hard to make sure that they go at everything with what they call the three-legged stool, which is tradition, scripture, and reason. Is that, using all of these things, that if it's reasonable, then, let's see if it fits in with our tradition, with scripture. If it does, then great. Then we can, adopt new policies. And this is, I think that if we started to treat like our everyday life with some of these things, all right, how does this fit in with my everyday life? Is this reasonable? Does this kind of fit within my religion? Does this fit with, my life, as it were? And that can ultimately lead to some great compromise and some wonderful new things getting started. And I think by saying, no, we need to go back to the way it was or anything else like that, that's really, really shutting off innovation.
And progress. Like, there's a reason why things changed. There's a reason why women fought to have the same rights to money as men did. Because a lot of the times, widows were left with nothing, especially if they didn't have any kids. Like, they essentially were tossed out into the streets because they didn't have access to any money at all. So it's there's all I'm saying is that you should not glorify the past as much as you think. I mean, fashion is one thing. I mean, if anybody wants to bring back poodle skirts, I'm all for it. But but in terms of like the overall like society of the 50s, I wouldn't want to go back.
Well, that's, I think, the definition of postmodernism is to bring things back with a little bit of a sense of irony. And I mean, especially for postmodern art, and granted we're now postmodern, but is that's ultimately what the movement of postmodern art was to kind of give the sense that the old stuff is new again, because everything goes about in a cycle. And I think that's what Margaret Atwood was getting at a lot with this book, especially, was that things tend to go in a cycle. That yes, this is in the realm of possibility because things go in a cycle. History repeats itself. And
and there was a time when women were forced to be essentially sex slaves in order to procreate.
Yeah. And the wonderful thing about one of these interviews that I read was that Margaret Atwood, she said the number one question about her book was, is it a feminist book? And she says, it depends on what you mean by feminist. If by, making sure that the women in my book were so abused that they didn't have a choice to do anything, or that they had to feel a certain way, then no. It is not a feminist book. But if you mean feminism in the sense that they are real human beings and they make their choices from a place that real human beings make them, then yes, it is a feminist book because women are real human beings. And I think that ultimately this has to do with religion, because so long The church has fought things like women priests and women preachers and stuff like this because...
Women participation in church in general.
Exactly. Because of this outdated idea that, came from Paul, one of Paul's writings. And it's Paul grew up in a misogynist society because Jewish and Greek societies were very misogynist.
And the start of the Christian church was actually mostly focused on women. Like, women were the ones that were bringing it about to their families. Women were the ones that were bringing people into their homes to celebrate, like, this makeshift service that was, like, when Christianity first started.
Yeah.
Like,
the
it really
Marthas,
was.
as they use that name in the show. But...
Yep. It was very much... at the very, very, very beginning, it was very much a women's religion.
Oh, yeah. And the funny thing is that that's the original ending to the Book of Mark. That you could tell that one of the scribes added an ending later on, which is now the ending that's in the actual Bible. But
so how was it supposed to end?
The original ending of Mark is with the women finding the empty tomb. And so you're to imply that oh, of course they went and they told people because, we know that Jesus rose from the dead. And, that obviously these women came out and told everybody because,
I mean, I would be surprised.
And so do research that. That is an actual thing, that there is the original and the added ending of Mark. And I think that's very true. And in fact, even reading... some of the Quran is focused on women as well. Is not putting them down, but elevating them for the things that they did and for their place in society. And so I think that ultimately we do a huge disservice in our religions to women now because we misinterpreted something along the way, that we got this unequal balance in our doctrine, and so
or they were upset with how things were and then kind of twisted the words that were already put into making it a different meaning.
Yeah. And that's not to say that Islam is particularly misogynistic. It's not.
Oh no, it's as much, as Christianity. Possibly Christianity is more.
Yeah, and Judaism is not misogynistic at all. It really depends on the interpretation of the doctrine within the certain religion.
Which is also why there's so many. Yeah, and that's why there's so many. If you notice, there's a lot of different denominations of Christianity, and they have varying levels of, women's leadership roles in the church. There's some of them where, honestly, the women are there to serve the men.
Yeah.
That's it. Like, that is their role. They are there to serve the men. They are there to push out babies. They are not allowed to go to college. They're not allowed to get an education past the level of high school. Sometimes even junior high, depending on which, denomination you're in. And I'm talking about, like, this is happening in the United States. Like, this is not some, like third world country that this is happening in. Like, this is happening in the United States.
Yeah, I just learned this week, and I do like Samantha Bee's show on TBS, but I just learned that it is still legal in some states in this country for children to be married.
Most states under the age of 18, I think all but one.
And that just sickens me. Mm-hmm. And a lot of them is to get around statutory rape, and that just angers me and it sickens me because my years as a youth minister thinking about those kids were not
there's no way.
They didn't know about themselves enough to even make that decision for themselves.
Yeah, there's no way they would have been ready. And the fact that kids as young as 13 can legally be married with parents' consent. And why I don't understand why parents would be like, oh, so you had intercourse with this older person. Well, I don't want to prosecute this older person. Why don't you just marry him? That makes no sense to me. I don't understand why you would do that.
Yeah, it's crazy. I'm sorry, that's completely off the point. Well,
not really, because a lot of the people who are marrying young are girls. It's not boys that are being forced to marry young. It's girls that are being forced to marry young.
Yeah, unless it's like one of those shotgun wedding type deals.
Yeah, but that's a whole nother topic.
Yeah, but I'm going to bring it back around to the show here because this is a thing about women in some of the other countries, especially with human trafficking, is to be used as sex slaves, as to be used as baby carriers, as to be used as incubators, rather than human beings. And I think this is ultimately what the show is about, is to see people as human beings. Is that when we get that imbalance of seeing other people and especially women as less than human, that some terrible things can happen. And it was particularly scary for me because it felt real. And I meant to say this at the very beginning, but as a warning to those of you who have not watched the show, and why you're listening to our show, I have no idea, but is just want to remind you that this show is not reality, is not a prediction of future events. And also to remember that what is going on in our country right now is also not normal. That's not the way that things should be done, is not the way that compromise should happen. And
compromise should happen.
Yeah.
I mean, right now compromise is not happening.
Exactly. And that's ultimately what I think is saddest. And so that brings us to where we should go from here. Sorry about the weird cut here, but we do have our special third presenter with us again today.
It's Peter.
Yeah, he is teething, so he doesn't sleep very well recently.
Like 4 molars are coming in right now.
Yeah, for some reason he likes to take all of his stress and pain at the same time, just like his parents. So I'm going to go into the where we should go from here section, which I think that, especially with what we've been talking about here, is that equal rights is something that we should all work for. That it's a compromise. It is not something that say, oh, those people over there should be fighting for this.
Well, and I think a lot of people are nervous about equal rights because they feel like their rights will be taken away because other people are gaining rights, which is not what is not what the movement is about.
Is that if you give women equal pay, that it'll take away from men's pay?
Yeah, that's not how it works.
Yeah, no. Or raising the minimum wage will lower everyone else's wages, and there will be less jobs, which I don't think that's the way that works either. I know that there are some mom and pop shops that can't afford to do this, that can't afford to bring up the minimum wage. But the problem with our economy is our economy is based on people spending money. And
if you don't have money to spend,
yeah,
because
exactly.
you don't have enough to actually live.
Well, what's funny is that the people who spend the most money are the ones who have to spend they're able to spend it. Like, for instance, the teenager who is working at McDonald's, if he were to get a living wage, a minimum wage job, working at McDonald's, $15 an hour, that teenager would spend more money outside in other places, in like the movie theater, in the mom and pop shop, the drugstore down the street, whatever, because that's one of their favorite places to go and to spend money. And that's how the free market economy works. That's how we set up this country to work.
Yeah, well, let's.
Sorry, I'm getting off on the economy. So
let's move on to sticking on the topic.
Is this has to do with justice as well, and I mean this show had a very warped sense of justice. I think is that there was, the men in power, they're signing death to people because either they had engaged in an immoral act, as they saw.
Well, and everybody died. It just depended on like what you did. Would then ultimately go about how you died. You know what I mean? So you would still die no matter what, but the way that you would die would change.
Yeah, and I mean, that's not justice, and I think that this is something that as we said in our episode on Get Out, was that justice is everybody's problem. It is something that we should all work towards, especially in religions, is that we need to work for justice, and not just justice that we think is fair, but a justice that we can all agree is fair, is just and good. And I know that not everybody's going to agree on, the fact that we think that the death penalty is immoral.
Yeah.
But, is to come to a compromise and actually talk about it and talk about why we think that, all life is sacred. Even, some people who have done some horrible things.
Well, and my thing, too, if we're going to, still talk about the death penalty, is that it's typically more expensive versus
yes.
life. Yeah, so we're actually saving the taxpayer money by not having the death penalty. But anyway.
Well, one of my biggest things about this while watching this is I was remembering when I was involved in the church, so much time, energy, and money was spent in trying to tell people how to prevent some bad things from happening within the church, especially with making sure that people always saw you and that you didn't, sexually harass the kids that you were working with or the people that you were working with.
But you shouldn't anyway.
Yeah.
Like, as just a person.
Yeah,
Don't sexual harass people.
That's what I'm trying to say, is that this gets me onto the full fact that I think that the church has spent way too much time, energy, money, and so much of its resources on trying to prevent sin from happening instead of trying to work with the people after the fact and trying to sit down and come to a compromise and trying to redeem the person who did the abusing and to help the abused to work through that. And obviously separately, because you don't want those two people together again, because that thing did happen. And I think that if our same amount of money was spent, time, energy, and money was spent helping those people to work through these things, is to get counseling and get therapy for the abused, to help the sick and hurting, to help the least of these, that we would, in essence, a byproduct would be preventing that sin that we set out to prevent to begin with.
Yep.
And so, anyway, that's just me, and Peter's laughing at a picture of himself. So, yay, he's got his game on now. All right. So, but, I really think that that we spend way too much of our time, and this is what I'm talking about in the show world, is that this is a very, very extreme Christian group, and I can see some Christian groups actually doing this, which is why it scares me so much.
Yeah, because this is like something that they would love to have. Like, this is something that they would strive for. Maybe not necessarily having concubines, but the whole like men in charge, women at home, and there being like different levels for different people depending on your status in life.
Yeah.
They would love to have that. I'm sorry.
I know. So, with all that being said, I know we're getting a little distracted now because we've got our third presenter here with us, and since his game makes a lot of noise, we can't really put it fully on for him. But we just want to wrap this up now. Is obviously we didn't get around to touching on a lot of the major themes in this show, a lot of the biggest things that were brought up, and so that's why we want you guys, the listeners, to see our questions, to see those links, and to engage the show like we have. Is talk about this and give us feedback, because we would love that. Love, because this is a conversation. That's why we named our show Honest Faith Conversations.
Honestly, like, you can leave it in the comments on Facebook, you can email us, you can tweet at us.
Yeah.
Whatever your little heart desires.
You can call us. And by the way, our voicemail number, it is a Google Voice number, is 720-372-3879. If it adds to the conversation, we will definitely use it in one of our future episodes.
Yeah.
And even if your comments, because as you saw, we do have a comment response system, which we use today.
Hooray!
Yay! So we are on Facebook. We are on social media. We are on Twitter. On Facebook, it is facebook.com/Real Honest Faith. On Twitter, we are at Real Honest Faith. On Tumblr, I can't remember what we are, but we're on Tumblr too. I don't check it a whole lot, but we are on Reddit as well. There is a whole subreddit for The Honest Faith. You can also find us on our website at thehonestfaith.com. Also, go and check out our Patreon page, because we do have one.
Yes.
If you like our episodes, if you like our podcast, great.
Subscribe to us.
Help to support us, because we are wanting to buy better equipment to publicize a bit more, because we enjoy doing this. We love doing this, and we hope that you guys are getting as much from this as we are. And so check out our Patreon page. And with all of that being said, we invite you to come and join the conversation.
Bye.